And so now we get to move on to the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, which is really the meat of this unit. The rest kind of just sets this up, really. And so we've got this event called the Enlightenment that happens roughly in the 1700s. Some a little before, some towards the end and after, but roughly the Enlightenment happens in the 1700s. And really the Enlightenment is just a continuation of the ideas of the Renaissance. And remember, the Renaissance is what happens after the Dark Age, and so we kind of have this idea that the Dark Age is the pit, it's terrible, and then the Renaissance is this upward trend after it. And so the Enlightenment kind of does the same thing. If absolute monarchs are here in the pit, not so good, not really freedom for people, democracy, not at an all-time high. The Enlightenment is this challenge against it coming up the hill. And so these ideas of the Renaissance, of humanism, etc., this is kind of a continuation of that and a rejection of absolutism. And so the basic idea of the Enlightenment is humans should think with reason to understand society and nature. So basically, to understand the entire world that we live in, humans should think with reason, rejecting traditional beliefs and authority, such as the Catholic Church. So any traditional ideas, the idea that we should do it this way because we've always done it this way, or we should believe this way because this is how our parents believed or our grandparents believed, this is rejected in the Enlightenment, and reason rules the day. So we've got thinkers like Locke and Rousseau who reject the ideas of guys like Hobbes. And so what Thomas Hobbes was about, and this is kind of a throwback to the first lesson, and this is a name you should know, that's Thomas Hobbes. If you're not taking notes right now, you probably should. So this guy Hobbes says that these absolute rulers are justified in being absolute rulers because people are naturally bad. And so if you've got a nation or a country of people that are naturally bad, then the only thing that you can do as a leader is to have absolute power over them to make sure society stays in control. And so Hobbes thinks that power for leadership doesn't come from the people, it comes from perhaps God or a duty to control the masses of people who are naturally bad. And so that's Hobbes. And so the Enlightenment is kind of a rejection of that way of thinking. And so you've got guys like Locke who and Rousseau who come up with this idea called a social contract theory. A social contract theory is the idea that a leader gets his power because the people he governs allows them to do so. And so it's this contract between leaders and followers that, okay, we understand we need leadership to keep society together, so you can be our leader, but we'll only let you be our leader so long as you treat us well and act in our best interest. And so Locke and Rousseau are against the ideas of this guy, Hobbes. Locke is going to be famous in American history because of his rejection of absolute rule, but also because he says things like government should protect life, liberty, and property. You should write that down. Life, liberty, and property. Later on, it'll become famous in an American founding document as Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, where the ideas of Locke got kind of hijacked a little bit by some Americans. But he thinks government should protect life, liberty, and property, and believes in this idea of a social contract. Rousseau is a Frenchman who also believes in this social contract. In fact, he wrote a book called The Social Contract, and he's all about people being naturally good and this idea of a social contract as well. And his ideas lead to the French Revolution, which we'll get to in the next unit. There are tons of Enlightenment thinkers. There's Blackstone, Voltaire, Jefferson, Montesquieu. The list goes on, and you'll learn about them in a project during this unit. But I'm not going to waste time telling you about each individual one here. because all of them share the central ideas of reason and rejecting absolute government and tradition. The Enlightenment is all about thinking with reason. If the Renaissance was all about the human, the individual, humanism, individualism, the Enlightenment is all about this one word, reason. We're rejecting absolute government. We're rejecting tradition. Everything is about reason. And this overflows into an event called the Scientific Revolution, which is a byproduct of the Enlightenment. Again, a continuation of Enlightenment ideas. And so we get the birth of the scientific method, posing and testing hypotheses. We're, again, no longer accepting traditional practice, much like our guys Galileo and Copernicus did in the time of the Renaissance, challenging tradition. This is continued, and so we've got the scientific method that comes into play. And then really the most important scientist, and there are others like Boyle, etc., and your science teachers would get mad at me for excluding others, but the big one is Sir Isaac Newton and his idea of gravity, and that gravity is a law that governs everything that happens on this earth. And so we know gravity is when you drop something, it falls to the ground, but that also gravity governs things in the universe, and so gravity is kind of what holds our solar system together, and with these rings of orbit and etc. I could explain to you how it works, but you should just probably ask a science teacher how gravity and the solar system and galaxies and all that junk works. But Sir Isaac Newton is the one who comes up with these theories, and it's because of this scientific method, posing and testing hypotheses, because he is challenging the tradition of the Catholic Church. And so down here in your most important box, you've got Enlightenment, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Scientific Revolution, and Isaac Newton.